sure that,
Should being the operative word.
Yep, there we go. I think our audio is now working.
Huzzah, huzzah.
Huzzah! Let me move the mic a bit closer, make sure that we can both be heard well enough. Here, how about this? I'm going to move this back a bit more. Bring your chair in. Good. All right, good. We should be working now. Hello, everybody. Hello. Hope you're all doing well. Let us know if you can hear us okay. Make sure that audio is working well. Please let us know if you can hear us okay. Man, this is gonna be rough, guy. This is gonna be rough, Lark. Because I'll be honest, I know that the majority of this is just gonna be people repeating the phrase "rock and stone" over and over and over.
Hey, you know what? If it feeds the algorithm, I'm here for it.
I mean, if it feeds the algorithm, fine.
Hey, listen, if that meme could make the league, they could meme the leagues of Votan into existence, then by golly, it can give us some clout as well.
Hey, no, it's what it is. But anyway. Alright, so, welcome one and all to the second episode of Fantastical History. And you guys seem to really like the dragon one. Y'all really liked us talking about dragons. And I posted a poll asking if we should continue this. And you guys said, yes, please continue it. So, we are back with episode 2. And by popular demand, we have been asked to talk about dwarves next. Dwarves. Well, as always, I'm joined by my brother Lark, and we're here. If you guys don't know what's going to go on here, here's how this is basically going to work. We're not going to be answering chat questions. We're not going to be looking at chat right away. What we're doing, genuinely, is if you ever put a camera on a wall when Lark and I go out to eat or something like that, we just talk. We just chat about stuff. You know, we will sit down, we'll pick a topic of conversation, and we'll just go. And so what we decided to do is, instead of doing a scripted video where we make notes and, pattern it all out, we just want you guys to hear us just chat. We're just going to chat about dwarves. We're going to talk about what we think they'd be like if they were in our history, how humanity would react to them, how they react to humanity, what history would look like as they evolve and we evolve, and whether or not they'd exist in our time and era, and if they do, how would things look different. That's pretty much what we're going to do. This will not be nearly as long as the dragon one, because there was a lot more to talk about with dragons. With dwarves, it's going to be a little bit more simplistic. So, with all that said, Lark, are you ready?
I believe I am.
All right, well, take a quick drink so that wet your whistle. See? There we go. All right, it's a little bit better. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started, Lark. So, first of all, dwarves.
Oh, hold on. We did just get a super.
Oh, we just got a. Yeah, it's rock.
Like I said, rock and stone is if it made the leagues of Votan.
Yeah, I know, but my thing is, I'm gonna hate that phrase by the end of this stream. I'm gonna hate that phrase.
Regrettably, it is the phrase that pays.
I know it is, but I'm gonna hate that phrase.
But thank you for
It's kind of like Ultramarines repeating courage and honor over and over again. It's like, F off. But anyway, all right. So let's get into it. So let's start off with let's set some ground rules. When we're talking about dwarves exist in a lot of different fantasy and sci-fi mediums. So let's go ahead and set the ground rules. What is a dwarf? And I'll start. I think that what we need to start with is a dwarf is going to be a humanoid creature, looking mostly human with slight differences. The average dwarf in height is going to be around 4 feet long, 4 feet tall. Maybe your taller ones get to 5.5. But your average dwarf height is going to be around 4.5 feet. They are going to be stocky, stout, usually kind of beer gut belly or plump, very thick hands and feet. They're going to have bulbous noses, and they're going to be pretty hairy, particularly facial hair. They're going to have a lot of facial hair, usually very long beards, and women dwarves will, in fact, have facial hair too. It's just the natural way they grow their hair. That is what I'm thinking. What do you think, Mark? Add your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I think they will be definitely. We're kind of looking at sort of like the Tolkien, maybe leaning a little bit into Warhammer Fantasy, but like your Norse / Tolkien dwarves is the primary inspiration for that, just because they are. But anyway, still relatively strong, but regardless, I think your explanation for them is probably sufficient.
Right. Now, I think the other thing that sets them apart, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, but dwarves are going to be pretty stubborn creatures. Like, dwarves in almost any medium that they're talked about are known for being stubborn, for being stiff-necked, for being traditionalists, for being very set in their ways and unwilling to waver. They are like the stones that they work. They are going to be very hard-headed and hard-minded.
Yeah. Pretty much stubborn as mules, even, yes, grudges could be, thank you for that. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that grudge idea a little bit later.
Right, we'll get into that a little bit later. We'll get into the grudge later. We're doing this as a process. We're just chatting.
Yeah.
We're just chatting right now.
So with the idea of that I think it's only appropriate, just like we did with dragons, we got to throw them back. We're going all the way back to like Neolithic time, Stone Age, is when we sort of, I don't know how we would say like whether they're a completely separate species or more likely they're like a branch off of humanity. Probably. Sort of like how you have like, Homo sapien, they would be like Homo dwarfus or something like that.
Homo dwarfism.
Whatever the Latin terminology would be.
Yeah, okay.
Stunties, there, that word.
Stunties. Okay, so now let's talk about like disposition. Quite often when you talk about dwarves, dwarves are known for metalworking, mining, forging, stuff like that. They work a lot with stone, steel, hammer, forge, stuff like that. I think that would probably lean into them living more in rugged, mountainous, hill-like areas. Probably building into mountains to a certain extent, kind of like what you'd see in Lord of the Rings. Maybe not as large scale as what we see in that.
Yeah, speaking of scale, I think one of the big problems you're going to have with it is like, as cool as it would be to like have like the Mines of Moria.
The Mines of Moria.
That sort of grand architecture, I think, is going to be few and far between because there's one big concern that we have to think about when it comes to the dwarves is how large can your population get? Because because there's two factors to this. One, if you're living under the mountain, that means unless you find a natural cave network, you are going to have to dig out your home, which can be done. And whatever you dig out, you can probably sell. Like, there's a good chance you can probably sell it or like build fortifications above. But the thing is, you're going to have a slower growing space. But also, if you are predominantly in mountain, hilly terrain, your food is going to be a little bit more scant because, well, there's not as many food grows as well in the mountains. And not to say that they can't. They probably would have to adopt some form of agriculture. I imagine there'd be a lot of shepherding and herding stuff around like goats and sheep and other stuff like that. But I think in relation to humans, they're not going to be able to produce the large, storage of grain to be able to support massive sprawl. I don't think there's just going to be like one massive city underground is what I'm trying to say.
I don't think so either. And I think we can go ahead and write off the idea that they're all interconnected too. Because people would argue like, one dwarf city would have underground tunnels to another dwarf city. That's just not going to happen.
Maybe in the close, like maybe if like you have like two cities like in the Swiss Alps or something, you could rock that. But like you're probably not going to have like something all the way down to like say the Himalayas.
I would also say that mountains, like mountains where you're probably going to see. Here's the thing: I think that you're going to see a lot more dwarves in heavy mountainous regions. Your Alps, your Rockies, your Appalachians, all that. And as you get further away from those mountains, you still might see a few, but you're not going to see nearly as many. Because I feel like dwarves are going to congregate very closely together. Because the way I see it, dwarves are very much conservative. They're traditionalists. They stick to what they know and their traditions. And as a result of that, you're going to see dwarves stick to their own more often than not. They're not going to lean into a lot of new age stuff or new innovation very easily. They're going, like, let's say that you have a dwarven tradition of smithing. And then you have humans who come along and invent something new. Dwarves are going to have a hard time wanting to accept that. In fact, they may even call it backwards. Like to use an example, the cotton gin. Like the cotton gin helped revolutionize cotton picking and cotton industry, right?
Yeah.
Do the same thing with dwarves. You may have dwarves who pick cotton. Cotton gin comes along, they may see that and go, that's laziness. You're accepting a lazy way to do things. We were made stronger and better by the traditional way. We don't want to do that. But then once humanity starts outpacing them in the production of cotton, then they might say, well, we're going to take the cotton gin and make it even better. We're going to make a better cotton gin using dwarven ingenuity, Yeah, kind of the same idea here.
I think it's like if they come up with the idea first, they're like, when they see the humans adopt it, like, well, of course they would adopt it. We make the better thing.
Exactly.
But, and that also gets the thing, like, I think they would be quick into metalworking because, like, of their connection to because well, they're living in, like, they got to dig out a mine anyway to live, so they might as well, take some advantage of the precious metals. And so with that, they're going to be, just like in Myth, renowned metal workers, very good, and their stocky strength is going to be beneficial for, crafting stuff. So a lot of humans are going to want to get involved and buy up dwarven goods. But I think the question is, like, when do we start seeing? Because I definitely think the dwarves are going to outlive, like, they're going to definitely survive the Neolithic period and go on further. I don't think there's any point they're going to go extinct.
Well, here's the thing. The big issue is, like, when we talk about dragons, the question was, would humans see them as a threat and want to destroy them? I don't think humans would see dwarves as a threat at any real point. Yeah, you might have your skirmishes and your wars, but I don't think humanity is going to look at dwarves and go, evil, kill it. I think they just look at them as, it's another variant of humanity. In fact, honestly, it's going to be kind of funny. In our past, here's the thing. This is something that people don't get about racism. And we're going to have to talk about racism a little bit here, because fantasy racism is...
Anytime we talk about a fantasy race, racism.
Yeah, so people like to think of racism in terms of color. Like white people hate black people hate white people, that kind of thing. But historical racism wasn't built on skin color. It was often built on culture or country of origin, or religion in some cases. It was built on where you came from and who you identified with. So it didn't really, like, for example, people in Europe didn't hate you if you were black. They hated if you were black and Ottoman, or black and Muslim, because you were the enemy that they were fighting at the time. If you were black and Christian, or black and lived in Europe a long time, you were pretty accepted. You'd be seen as different, but you wouldn't be hated. Dwarves are going to be way more different overall than people of a different skin color, so it'd be way more easy to develop kind of an animosity or distrust of them, but not enough to say, let's annihilate them.
Well, I think, and this is another reason why I think they would be into the mountains, because you have early on, because you look at, like, early forms of humanity, like, you have your Homo sapiens, you have Homo erectus, Neanderthals, I forget the exact specific name for them, but they kind of, like, they're competing for the same resources, and they kind of get wiped.
Right.
I think the big difference is, one thing we know about the dwarves that we know about Homo erectus and Neanderthals didn't have is dwarves can speak normal languages. Yes. So they could learn whatever human language is around them, and humans could learn the dwarven language. So there's a chance at actual communication. Other breeds of humans could not do that. And so there's a chance for communication, but I do think in the early days they're going to compete for resources. And, like, if you're in, like, fertile plains or forests or anything like that, the dwarves are going to be pushed into the hills and the mountainside countries, and that's, again, going to further stack onto what I was talking about how one side's going to predominantly have the food.
Well, what's funny is moving into the mountains may actually help them in the long run. Because humanity, for the longest time in its early periods, was very much hunter-gatherer, and they traveled, they moved around. This helped them take land and help them settle in other places, but it also meant that they lived by the food that they hunted and the crops that they could grow. Dwarves who settle in the mountains can kind of stake claim to it and start agriculture and cropping there very quickly and easily. Also, it means that they don't have to move as much, and they can set down pretty sizable roots where they live. Mm-hmm. So let's transition from that into the next point. So we've gotten past Homo erectus, we've gotten past the caveman era, the hunter-gatherer society. Let's get into, like, the Roman periods, like the Roman kind of...
Okay, so we're looking at classical antiquity.
We're looking at classical antiquity, and if I'm being real honest here, dwarves are going to be very interesting at this point, because I imagine dwarves will have... Humanity can make steel and metallurgy and jewelry and stuff fine, but dwarven stuff is probably going to be seen of higher quality, so you're going to see a lot of trading with them, because the dwarves need to trade, because while they can, like, you could probably see dwarves in a mountainside, like, maybe having gardens or crops that they could grow on flatter areas.
Yeah,
maybe raising goat herds.
I think they might do like what the Japanese do, like terrace farming.
Terrace farming is probably what they do. You probably have some goat herding, like shepherding like that, but they wouldn't be able to produce the agriculture and food and supplies that humans can. And as a result, they would almost need humans. And I think this is where we come into the crux of it. Which race, if push came to shove, would be able to kind of laud themselves over the other? Would dwarves ever reach a point where we needed their supply, or would dwarves ever reach a point where they needed our supply? And I think, if I'm being honest, and you can disagree with me, I think it would never reach a point where the dwarves could lord over us. It would almost always end up humans lording over the dwarves. Because I don't think the dwarves could produce the goods and supplies they need to outlast humans. Like, earlier I saw someone in chat say that trying to storm a dwarven hold would be a nightmare. I disagree. Because all you gotta do is starve them out. Literally, go with the basic siege tactic. If humans and dwarves went to war, and the humans had to besiege a dwarf mountain hold, surround the mountain, just wait. If they try to leave, shoot them with arrows, pepper them with arrows. Because honestly, eventually the dwarves are not going to be able to produce the food and supplies necessary to last. If they come out of their mountain, they're in your territory. And the nice thing is, since they don't have backup coming from other mountains to help them, the humans can keep supplying themselves as long as they need to.
Yeah, exactly. But this is where I think it gets interesting, because, also on a side note, one of the things you can do is you like pull a Oda Nobunaga and just light the whole mountainside on fire and just go, we're going to suck the oxygen out of there, bud. Have fun with that.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And there are other options like, well, we'll have escape tunnels. Yeah, guess where you got to go?
Right to us.
Couldn't help but notice you were right there. And not to say that it would still be an easy attack. I think like dwarf forces versus human forces, dwarves was definitely going to take. It's just battle of attrition, baby. It's all about the attrition. And I think it would get a little bit more complex, because as we get into the Antiquity era, as we talk about, you're going to have various cultures vying for dwarves for dwarven metalwork. I imagine kings and nobles are going to want to show off that, look how good my stuff is. Like, my stuff was made by dwarves, so you know it's good.
Yeah.
And so they would not want to, oftentimes you wouldn't want to seek to take out the dwarves. You would be trying to vie favor for them. So their power would not be like, oh, look, we're so stocky and so strong, rock and stone, we can win. It's, you want the good stuff, don't you? Well, you better make sure you have the best trade deal with us.
They would very much be good traders in that sense. They would have to learn some charisma. I think that... No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was going to say, just like, I think they would have, like... I think the best way to look at them is like sort of like how... you had sort of like the Italian city-states in the medieval period. Yeah. I think a lot of dwarf holds would be very similar to that.
Yeah.
And how they deal with politics. But go ahead with what you were saying.
Well, what I was going to say was, we need to go ahead and address the issue of grudges. I think it's time we get to that. The whole idea, like, this comes from Warhammer and a little bit of Lord of the Rings, but the idea that dwarves hold on to grudges for a long period, like if you offend a dwarf, if you upset a dwarf, they're going to hold it against you forever, and they're going to do anything they can to kill you for it. If that is the way dwarf culture is, it will not suit them and it will not last. Because, frankly, they can't afford to hold grudges against every single human and hope to beat them in long term. Like, honestly, the dwarves who adhere to that philosophy and idealism are going to be not only few and far between, but not long-lived. That is my stance on that.
Yeah. The other thing is, the more zealous they are about that grudge thing, the more likely they are to die off, as they will have fewer allies and fewer diplomatic options. Whereas those that are willing to be a little bit more lax with that have a better chance of rebounding in terms of any form of circumstances.
I think that the big net change that you'd see with time, like as we get from classical antiquity to the medieval period and all that, you'd probably see us advance faster into these periods. Like, you'd probably see higher level metal armor and weaponry appearing in battlefields, higher tier jewelry and masonry and engineering appear much quicker, because as dwarves create new things, humanity is very quick to catch up. They would never quite meet the unique standard and quality that dwarves can, but they can replicate pretty easily. Like if a dwarf builds this absolute god tier set of armor, a human could probably produce something similar, but not quite as good quality.
Yep. At least not until we get to the heavy industrial period.
Once we hit the industrial period, I think dwarves are going to have to change. And here's why. Remember how I talked about earlier, dwarves would not want to accept what humans create, like they're very traditionalist. Mm-hmm. Up until the industrial period, dwarves could stick to that. I think dwarves could just kind of say, you humans do what you do, we're going to be so much better. But once you see humans building these factories and a manufactura and stuff like that, the dwarves are going to have to say, okay, we have to adopt some of this ourselves, or start leaning into this and helping humans produce. And then you could see whole dwarven manufacturing companies, dwarven shipwrights, dwarven industries, dwarven construction companies. You could see dwarves start to really step into building as an industry, and kind of like, I hate to compare them to the Jewish nation because that's always a joke that people make, but you could see something very similar happen.
Well, Tolkien did inspire a lot of the dwarf culture off of ancient Jewish culture or Israelite culture, so there is that. But going back to medieval period.
Yeah. I jumped ahead.
And then to the ideas. One of the things I saw in chat was just like the idea of like, hey, how would they serve along in terms of army, in terms of like human armies, potentially, because you would have alliances formed. Like, let's talk like for Antiquity, so let's talk Rome.
Right.
Like Rome would probably establish connections with any dwarves that were in the region, like in the Alps or in the Apennine Mountains, and so they would want to keep them on good terms because they want to keep their legions supplied. Mm-hmm. And so, with that, you may see as sort of like an honor pact of that, you might see the Romans either take over, not the dwarf territory, but like, hey, you're our protectorate, we will be the ones that help fight for you. And so in turn, you might see a few dwarf warriors show up in like the Roman auxilia. You might see dwarven mercenary bands pop out, but I don't think you would ever see a huge number of them. If anything, I think what you might see them for is like they might be hired out. One, smiths, obviously, but two, you might see them bring out to like help maintain siege works.
Right. I think more than anything, and here's the question that would probably come up is, would dwarves fight or live alongside humans? And I think you'd see some of that. In fact, I think you could even see situations where like you have dwarves who leave their mountain homes. Because I think if dwarves are going to fight amongst anyone, it's going to be amongst themselves. Probably for dynastic successions in their own kingdoms or against rival dwarf lords or stuff like that. And you'd probably see some who say, hey, we're sick of living in these mountains dealing with this infighting. Let's move into a human town. And they could show up like, hey, you know what? We're from this mountain over there. We've gotten sick of living there. I'm a blacksmith. I've heard you're looking for one, like you need a new one. I'd be happy to work. Just give us a place to live.
Sort of like that one dwarf that's in that town in Witcher 3.
Yes, very similar. You could see something similar to that, and not even just blacksmithing. Like, this is something that I think needs to be brought up. I don't think we should limit dwarves to just smithing and mining and stuff like that. I can imagine dwarves. It probably wouldn't be as common, but you could see dwarves working in farming. You could see dwarves working in banking. You could see dwarves working in artistry. You could see dwarves working in poetry. I think you could see dwarves working in a lot of fields. I just think because they're so traditionalist and so steeped in culture, a lot of them are going to see mining and blacksmithing and forge work as just this is what we do, you know?
That's what my great-granddad did, that's what my granddad before him did, that's what my father did, and by golly, that's what I did and what my son's going to do. That sort of thing.
Now, I do want to bring this up before we move on to anything else. While we're still in the Antiquity discussion, I think that, okay, take for example Hannibal's crossing of the Alps. If dwarves were allied to Rome, but Hannibal showed up and offered them a good deal, or offered them money, or offered them something, would dwarves hold loyalty to one human ruler over another? Because the way I see it, while they have loyalty as a hard part of who they are, at the same time, I think a lot of dwarves would kind of say human wars are human wars. Unless you're paying us for weapons, we don't really pick sides. And so they may not say, hey, Hannibal, we're not going to help you, but if you pay us, we'll let you cross.
I think the big thing is like if they go through, like do they try and raid any of the dwarves' food stores? In which case that would immediately prop.
Yeah, if they tried to raid from the dwarves, I think that Hannibal would not have crossed those Alps.
No, that would have to be a huge consideration. He might not even go to cross the Alps now with that being in consideration, unless he knows he can either guarantee safe passage, or he can at least establish, like maybe cause some infight, like maybe cause them a couple dwarf holes to start fighting each other, because Hannibal's a smart enough cookie to know that.
Yeah. Okay, so
another question I was just I was thinking about. Antiquity goes on, Christianity hits the scene. How do the dwarves take to Christianity suddenly coming around?
If we assume that the dwarves are an offshoot of humanity or created sentient in God's image, then they would be just as needing of the gospel as anyone else.
Yeah, they would be, but it's interesting. Like, do you think there would be a slower take for them to adopt?
Probably, I would say. Oh, well, I mean, it begs a few questions. First of all, are they descendants of Adam and Eve, or are they something else entirely? If they're not descendants of Adam and Eve, they might not have ever been, gone through the fall in the same manner.
But I'm going to go with the assumption, yes.
Okay. So in that case, yeah, then I think it would be a little bit slower because, again, traditionalists, they're steeped in their tradition and culture, and as a result, they're going to be slow to adopt this human-based religion. Unless, of course, Jesus ever spoke to the dwarves.
And who knows, because it depends, how far spread are the dwarves? Are they only in European mountain ranges? Have they popped into the, is there a dwarven hold on Mount Sinai?
I lean into the idea that anywhere you can find a large mountain range, you're probably going to find a dwarf hold.
Yeah.
Like the Rockies, the Alps, the Appalachians.
The question, do they start in Eurasia, or are there some already in the Americas?
Well, I think we'd see some in the Americas when we get there, or probably not as many, or actually thought maybe they were primarily in Eurasia, but they traveled with the age of exploration, and thus immediately started settling in these new mountains. So by the time of the industrial period, you probably see dwarves already making their homes in the Appalachians and the Rockies.
Yep, and that'd be kind of interesting, because then you got to get into who does say the original land grants of the 13 colonies. A lot of them just went all the way to the Pacific, and so are the dwarven holds going to set up there be colonies of dwarven holds? Are they going to be under British Dominion or Spanish or French Dominion, whoever? How is that going to work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they'd adhere as much to human rulers. I think that they'd pay. Here's the thing. Let's say that you have dwarves living in the Appalachians during the time that the Brits controlled the Appalachians, and the Brits showed up and demanded taxation. I think the dwarves would say, go fuck yourself. But if the Brits are willing to pay them for goods, say, all right, now we'll talk.
Yeah, that's another thing. But also another thing to consider is that they could potentially remove a huge barrier, because the Appalachian and Rocky Mountains, both parts, are huge barriers to travel. Because literally, if you had a farm on the other side of the Appalachians in, say, Ohio, it was literally faster to put your goods onto a boat and have it go all the way down the Ohio into the Mississippi, come around the Gulf, and then around Florida, and then come back up to the East Coast. That was the quicker way than going through the Appalachian Mountains. With dwarves there,
you could pay dwarves to move stuff.
Not only move it, they would be carving out tunnels that would make travel and going through much easier.
Yep.
So, ironically, you could see situations say everything lines up, American Revolution's going off the same, when the Proclamation of 1763 comes down, banning travel across the Appalachian Mountains. The British are going to have to convince the dwarves to agree to that, so they close down the regular mountain passes.
Yeah. And then, of course, you also, with the westward expansion, dwarves would not live in those plains or the open fields, but you would see them in the Rockies for sure. And
they would adore the Rockies and the Andes Mountains.
That's my point. So they'd have to travel through the plains. So if, let's say, the dwarves in the Rockies wanted to do trade with dwarves in the Appalachians, they may need humans to help with that, because they're not going to make that trip across the plains.
They'd be very big into, I think knowing dwarves what they are, they would love themselves some railroads once they finally got along. In fact, you might see a few dwarves going, "No, we totally invented that first."
Yeah, we were the ones who made the railroads.
If not in actuality because they did, more so because this is too useful and we got to get over our pride thing, so we're going to pretend we invented it.
I would see dwarves still holding to that pride, but just kind of being it's kind of like we invented the steam engine. We made a better one.
What you invented was sure produced steam. We made the train.
When we see Henry Ford make the automobile, dwarves, we made the gnome-mobile.
Actually, I'm not sure they would be as big into cars.
No, they really wouldn't.
Because you think about it,
I was making a point.
I know, but it's just something to think about. When cars do get a thing, cars moving underground aren't going to be as big a thing. Trains would be more efficient and produce less stuff, because one thing you got to watch out for in an underground environment is how much carbon monoxide you're producing and other stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
I think they'd be fun with steam engines, though.
Then there would be another thing to consider, not just but dwarves in the Middle East, dwarves in America. They're probably going to be getting big into oil too.
Yes, dwarves in oil will be a big thing. I could see, dude, I just got this mental image of a dwarf just dressed in a three-piece suit with a cigar, riding in a limo through his fields of oil. Them boys talking about rock and stone, I've got oil and gold.
Yeah, it's just like you have coal mining dwarves irritated with the oil dwarves going, those new money dwarves.
And there could be this animosity between dwarves who lean into gold or lean into oil, and then the ones who lean into mining and forging, and then the ones who lean into textiles.
Oh gosh.
As dwarves evolve and change their ways, you're going to see a lot of dwarves just hate on each other for it.
Yeah, it's going to be really weird when they get into strip mining, because they're going to go, that is just completely a barbaric way of doing it. But they're like, it's like, but no, we're not strip mining a mountain. It's like in the middle of a rainforest somewhere. Then we don't care. Go for it. It's like, as long as the mountain's beauty is preserved, that's what I care about.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we've kind of gone into it, but I will just say this: as we get into the modern age, because I think we've jumped all the way to the modern age here. That's where we're going to see dwarves really change. Let's talk about this. I want to say this. In the modern era, I do think dwarves would exist in the modern era.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's any reason they wouldn't. They'd probably take many of the same jobs humans do, without real effort. I think where you would see them would still congregate primarily around mountains and mountain ranges. The question is, interacting with humans. Like, for example, would dwarves ever think about marrying humans, and could they even breed with humans? Could dwarves and humans actually mate and produce offspring?
If we're considering them as like Neanderthals, I think the answer is yes, because we do know like there are certain humans in Europe that do have like a certain percentage of Neanderthal in them. So I don't think it would be necessarily common, but I think as you get towards the modern age, it starts to become a little bit more common as cultures start to mingle and mix a little bit more. And then you might see some scandalous things going on, like dwarves raised outside of the holes, women, like dwarven women shaving regularly.
I think that would piss off a lot of dwarves.
The dwarf tradition is like that harlot shaving her face.
Like, Maria, you shaved your face. You don't understand me, Daddy. And like, but yeah, I think that dwarves would interact pretty well with humans overall. I think there would always be a little bit of animosity. You're always going to see a little bit of human not liking dwarf not liking human action going on. And you probably, I think, especially during like the segregation era and during...
The thing is, I think the dwarves would self-segregate so much to the point it would be sort of like German immigration to agree to the United States, where it's just like, hey, they're doing their own thing, they don't bother us, so we don't think about it.
During the civil rights period, you're going to see a lot of dwarves just kind of go like, look, we've kept our own devices so long, we get it.
Yeah.
Like, we're not sitting here demanding, hey, equal representation for... Like, no, we get it.
It's like, are you still buying dwarf stuff? Good.
Are you still buying our shit? Yes.
But, like, think about some modern jobs they might do. Like, because we obviously know mining, oil refinery, like, heavy industry stuff. The dwarves are going to be in... They're going to love... Dwarves are going to love factory works because they're smaller, and so they can get away with more machine work.
Right.
But... I think you're right. Bankers would be good. In fact, I think they might be some of the earliest banking houses in Europe, because they're basically going to build Gringotts, dude. They're going to be like,
they're not goblins.
Like, sure, besieging a mountain may just be a matter of getting a large army, but bank robbers going to have a hard time getting in the dwarf hold.
Yeah, good luck.
Because you got to be dwarf sized in order to get in there.
I also see them working as lawyers. I think, given the fact that dwarves are so meticulous about rules and tradition, they would probably be very quick to pick up law and like customs and stuff like that.
Yeah, considering how stubborn they are, dwarven law firms might be like the biggest on retainer. It's just like, pack it in, boys. Disney hired the dwarven law firm.
Like, just here, like, like I'm Counselor Doc representing the defense.
The biggest
beard is touching the ground.
The biggest insults in dwarven culture. Don't be a dopey. You dopey.
I love that. But yeah, honestly, I think that's kind of all there is to say about dwarves.
I think the only other thing I can think about with dwarves is like the idea of like what regions can we firmly establish would be like dwarven ruled areas, and I think, like I said, like any mountainous range, Swiss Alps definitely, maybe
the Rockies. The Rockies would be almost exclusively dwarf owned.
Appalachians, I think you see a little bit of a mix just because like those are a little bit shallower mountains, but the Andes, you would have a bunch of Spanish speaking dwarves.
The Baltics, I would say.
Maybe not as much as the Baltic. Like when you get into like more Norway, I think.
Yeah,
like
that's
the border
what I mean.
between Norway. Yeah, so Baltics. Yeah, I can see that. I don't think Tibet would ever form, at least not in the sense we know it, because it would be like Himalayas would be like the only ones crazy enough in the early period of humanity to move. There would be the dwarves.
Yeah, the Himalayas and that area would. Honestly, despite how big they are, you probably wouldn't see a sizable dwarf population.
Yeah, probably not up, but like I said, I think you would see enough of one to do it. Maybe as you get further down, as you get closer to like India or Chinese borders, you might see something a little bit more along the lines there.
Right. But I think that sums up all there is to say about dwarves. So, now that you have heard us discuss dwarves for about 40 minutes, this is y'all's time to ask questions. If you have questions that you'd like to hear us answer about dwarves, go ahead and ask them while, you're good, Lark? Okay, good. So go ahead and ask your questions, and we will try to answer what we can. So we will give you, I'd say, about 5 minutes to ask questions, and then we will answer questions as we can.
Yep. And I'm going to go ahead and answer one that I saw earlier. That's like, are elves involved with this? No. We are looking at this exclusively. It's just humans and dwarves. Every time we do a fantastical history, we're not including, we're not throwing everything at once, because that's too many X factors to keep track of.
Right.
So
maybe one day we'll do a talk about what if elves and dwarves existed, how it but we're not treating this as all fantasy races exist. No, this is just what if just dwarves existed.
Because I'm not going to go what's the political implications of the lizard men and the Loxodon hanging out with each other?
Yeah. But yep. So questions you have, ask away. You got 4 minutes. We'll see what they have to say. But yeah, I think that was a good discussion.
Yeah, I think so.
Definitely shorter than the dragon one.
Well, the thing is with dragon, that's not just another species that you can converse with. That's a whole animal. That's a game changer right there.
Okay, here we go. Here's one from Cynic. Where would the dwarves have a Christian majority, and when would they have converted en masse? Okay, so it begs the question, and this is why this is such an interesting topic. If dwarves are considered children of Adam and Eve, and therefore included in God's promise, then there's no question Jesus would have extended his forgiveness to the dwarves. The question therein is, would the dwarves accept it? I think the large amount of dwarves who are going to accept it are going to be the ones in the Mediterranean. Probably the ones that inhabit the Alps, I would say. That would be where you see a lot of them.
The first group, definitely.
The first big majority dwarves are going to be in the Alps, and then it will probably spread from there. I don't know if Christianity would become the chief dwarven religion, or if it would spread quite as powerfully as it did with humanity. But I think the large majority would be in the Alps.
I think the European dwarves would.
What god do you think dwarves can use? Oh, sorry.
I think the European dwarves would kind of fold over to Christianity for this reason. Once the Roman Empire wholeheartedly embraces it, the majority of their customer base is going to be Christian. And so because of that natural trade interaction, because religions often travel through trade routes.
Yeah.
And so in this case, I think you would see that sort of pop up. And in fact, that would be very interesting, because then you'd start seeing dwarven bishops and other stuff like that. You could have dwarves at the ecumenical councils and other stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that actually might be a little wild.
Do you think there were dwarves in the Americas before the Europeans arrived? We kind of answered that earlier. We think that if there would not be a large majority. The vast majority probably came from the Eurasian continent.
Because another thing to consider is the dwarves, being shorter and stockier, they're not going to be able to travel as much between, across, they're going to have a harder time traveling on foot without human assistance.
Next question, how well would dwarves live in human cities? They would have to need some things made for them. How would that work? I think that dwarves would live just fine in human cities. They're not incapable, and I think that structures would be built to accommodate dwarves. Especially
they would
if
build
know
them
the
themselves.
Dwarves are around. Yeah, they would.
They would take pride in the fact they would do it. You might see dwarven quarters in certain cities, depending on where they are. Say, for example, let's look at a city like Milan. Very close to the Alps itself, I suspect you might see a dwarven quarter or section where you have almost like a trying to think of compares, almost like a Chinatown, but it's Dwarf Town.
Mm-hmm.
So call it Rock Town.
Mm-hmm. How might dwarves interact with internet tech compared to humans?
They're going to be slow.
Probably a little slower. Isn't part of dwarf culture that they also strive to improve on their craft? Wouldn't dwarf mining and smithing be more advanced than human because each generation is striving to outdo the last? Yes, they would be trying to do better than the last, but still stick to their traditional way of doing it. So what I mean by that is I use the cotton gin as an example. If humans invented the cotton gin and dwarves were picking cotton the traditional way, dwarves would say that it's a lazy way to do it. You're trying to cheat your way to what we did and make ourselves better. But then once they peak out at what they do naturally, they're going to want to try to outdo the cotton gin. They will try to perfect on what they do, but not the same way humans do it. And the difference is, and this is something we need to realize, even though dwarf craftsmanship is going to be superior, human craftsmanship is going to be quicker and less expensive. So they can't afford to be too stingy on that.
Yep. Another thing, I saw one where it's just like talking about like how I would view in World War One. One, I think Switzerland wouldn't exist, at least not as we know it. I think it would be either one big dwarf hold or a collection of them. And so you could see, but I don't see them forming alliances in the traditional sense unless there's just like completely surrounded, like say the United States, like the Appalachian dwarves are probably going to be wholeheartedly American or at least American allied. Whereas like in the Swiss dwarves, they're going to be like, we're not picking a dog in that fight, and I think they would pull a Switzerland.
Yeah, I think dwarves are just going to kind of stay out of human conflicts as much as they can because it's not their business.
But it would be interesting to see the few dwarves that do live in those countries being drafted, and it's suddenly like, you're the best trench digger, you get in there.
Which military branch would a dwarf be perfect for? I guess
Army Corps of Engineers.
Yeah, Army Corps of Engineers. Similar to some IRL ethnicities, would they be seen as blue collar?
Some of them. Because,
yeah.
again, you're going to have your merchants, your bankers, and your lawyers, and even occasionally religious leaders. So I think the general impression would be that, but there would be enough of it that they would be viewed as, I think the best comparison I can think of is think of them like Germans.
Yeah.
How, like, you view the Germans like, hey, they're not afraid to go out and get to farm, but also that German banker is going to know exactly what he's doing.
Right. When would the dwarves fight in World War II against the funny mustache man? Again, this is going back to the same question that was asked before, and we're going to answer it the same way. Dwarves, for the most part, are going to stay out of human wars. They will sell weapons
and maybe mercenary contracts,
and maybe give mercenary contracts. But as a general rule, unless strong-armed or unless one army invaded their home, they're going to stay out of it for the most part. So would they like funny mustache man? No. Would they want to get involved personally? Not unless Hitler made it their problem. Otherwise, he's going to stay out of it. Do you think the dwarves would take credit for building the rocket that got Neil Armstrong on the moon? Would a dwarf try to put a dwarf on the moon? If Neil Armstrong built a rocket to the moon and the dwarves had nothing to do with it, they're not going to claim ownership of it because dwarves have too much pride in what they build. They're not going to say, hey, no, we made that. We made that. Because what they would do is they would either say, that's ridiculous, or they'd say, no, we can build a better one.
It has to be directly, like, beneficial to them. Now, that being said, you might see people try and approach dwarves to say, hey, since you're smaller, it would be easier to build ships around you, particularly stuff like spaceships and submarines.
Right.
So you may see them occasionally go and try and, like, focus on that. But
what original faith would the dwarves practice? I imagine some breed of paganism, because before the Abrahamic religions really took off, paganism was pretty much the religion of most tribes and cultures. Like if you see the Jews enter Canaan, everybody was pagan around them. They were mostly just pagan tribes around them.
Yeah.
So I could see the dwarves kind of leaning into that as well.
Probably some breed of polytheism.
Probably a polytheism. And depending on where they live, they probably adopt similar beliefs to what humans have. Like, for example, you probably have some dwarves who believe in Judaism. Some dwarves who believe in Rastafarianism. Some dwarves who believe in Shintoism. It really does depend on where they live and what they're interacting with and what cultures they're interacting with. Which is why I think that, if you had dwarves around Judea when Jesus was around, they'd probably adopt Christianity very quickly. I think it's going to depend on what they're exposed to.
The Zacchaeus story suddenly is that a dwarf story now?
Yeah. If the dwarves did have anything to do with the first moon landing, would they attempt to mine the moon or make a company to collect extraterrestrial stones and metals? I mean, here's the problem with that.
Let's get in Leagues of Votan territory.
Yeah, first of all, let's get in Leagues of Votan, but that's not even my issue. My issue is dwarves aren't stupid. And what I mean by that is, here's the problem that we're facing, and I don't think you're purposefully leaning into it, but it is a point I want to make. I don't want to lean into the meme. The meme about dwarves is they see rock and stone. I must mine. You hand a dwarf a rock, he's going to automatically want to chisel it. That's the meme. But dwarves aren't so stupid that the first dwarf on the moon thinks, how can I mine this? Like, a dwarf sent to the moon, the first dwarf to go to the moon, is going to be blown away by, wow, I'm actually on the moon. This is so cool. His first thought is not going to be, I'm going to the moon so I can effing mine it. And so, if they went to the moon and they were like, and they were told, hey, do you have any plans to mine it? He's like, he's probably going to say, I haven't even thought about that. Because keep in mind, a dwarf who goes to the moon is not a miner. He's an astronaut. He was trained to be an astronaut. It's what he's meant to do. His first thought is not, how can I mine this? It is landing on the moon. I think you would have some dwarves who may ask the question, is it mineable? Is it valuable? Is it something that we could make a profit off of? But I don't think that's the first thing a dwarf is going to want to do. And this is something I want to do with all these fantastical histories. And this is why I hate the phrase rock and stone right now. I don't like to lean into the meme. I like to look at it as realistically as possible. And realistically speaking, a dwarf who goes to the moon is not a miner or a rock enthusiast. He's an astronaut. And that we need to take into account.
He's an astro dwarf.
Yeah. How many modern things would you think the dwarves would have invented, or at least taken credit for inventing?
See, trains I think would definitely be on that list.
Trains, steam engines.
Definitely a lot of heavier plate mail. Definitely.
Yeah.
I think would be on that. Maybe some any form of mining equipment. I think you could definitely throw their way. Perhaps certain architectural achievements, maybe large scale safe doors and other stuff like that.
Would dwarfs be philosophers? Yeah, I think you'd have some philosopher dwarves.
Yeah, we already include the idea that there would be could be dwarf priests and stuff. So I don't think that goes into philosophy. But
well, not necessarily the mean thing, but of those metals were say better than steel or iron and then develop better stuff, etc.
I think that it would be less the quality of the material, it's just the quality of the craftsmanship for that material.
Right. A dwarf is the kind of person who you hand them a simple rock, they can make something awesome out of it. To them, it's going to be all about how they can take something shitty and make it something amazing. Wouldn't dwarves in the modern era strive to build farming habitats in their holes, having realized in the past how vulnerable they are to sieges?
Potentially, I think.
Potentially, but you're going to run into the problem of photosynthesis. It's hard to grow crops inside a giant mountain.
It's possible that's also going to bring up the electric bill, which I can see dwarf nuclear reactors now suddenly going up.
Yeah, dwarves are going to have to solve that problem. Not saying that they can't, but in the ancient days, where siege warfare is a big deal, it's going to be a problem.
Now it's now that every president's I need dwarves to build my nuclear bunker.
What would be a racial slur for dwarves? And on that, I think we're going to go ahead.
Stunty, there you go.
Stunty, yeah, their name's stunty. Anyway, I think that's going to be where we wrap it up. This was fun, Lark, and we almost got a full hour out of it, which I didn't expect.
Yeah.
But anyway, we are going to go now. I will release a poll later asking about what the next one will be, and we'll try to do one again next week. I don't want to guarantee anything, but we will try. Looking forward to it, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, we will see you in our next video. Take care.
Have a good one, fellas.